Ethan liked to think of himself as a man of simple pleasures, the kind who could spend hours watching sunlight filter through the trees, or who found more satisfaction in a cup of coffee brewed just right than in anything the modern world could offer. His cabin sat at the edge of the forest, a place where the world slowed down enough for him to breathe. Tonight, though, the forest was anything but tranquil. The sky above was alive with strange rippling lights. Not quite an aurora, not quite a storm, but something in between. Ethan leaned against the porch railing, mug in hand, as he squinted at the phenomenon. The lights danced and twisted, painting the treetops in hues of violet and gold. Well, he muttered to himself, either the northern lights got lost, or I've had too much coffee. The sound of something crashing through the underbrush snapped him out of his musings. Ethan set his mug down and grabbed a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness as he descended the steps. The crashing sound grew louder, more erratic, and then silence. He paused, his breath misting in the cool night air. "Hello?" he called, his voice steady but cautious. "Anyone out there?" A faint groan answered him, followed by a rustle of leaves. Ethan edged closer, his flashlight sweeping the forest floor until it landed on a figure sprawled beneath a tree. His first thought was that it was a person, a woman by the look of her, but as he stepped closer, the details didn't add up. Her skin shimmered faintly, like moonlight on water, and her hair, a cascade of silvery strands, seemed to glow in the dark. Most striking of all were her eyes, half open and gazing at him. They weren't human eyes. They were galaxies, swirling with stars and nebulae, infinite and unfathomable. Ethan froze, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. "Okay," he whispered. "This is either the weirdest wildlife encounter of my life, or I've wandered into a sci-fi movie." The woman, or whatever she was, tried to sit up, but collapsed with a pained cry. Ethan hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. Hey, take it easy," he said, crouching beside her. "You're hurt." Her gaze locked onto his, and she murmured something in a language that sounded like music, played backward. Ethan didn't understand a word, but her tone was pleading. He glanced at her injuries. Deep gashes along her arm and side, oozing a silvery fluid that shimmered like mercury. "Right," he said, more to himself than to her. "No idea what you're saying, but you need help." Carefully, he slipped an arm under her shoulders, wincing as she let out a soft whimper. She was surprisingly light, her body almost weightless despite her height. Ethan carried her back to the cabin, his mind buzzing with questions. Who or what was she? Where had she come from? And perhaps most importantly, what had hurt her? Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the alien strangeness of the woman he laid gently on the couch. Ethan grabbed his first aid kit, though he doubted bandages and antiseptic would be much help. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice the odd texture of her skin, smooth and cool, like polished stone yet pliable. The silvery fluid from her wounds didn't clot like blood. Instead, it seemed to crystallize, forming a delicate, glass-like scab. "This is officially above my pay grade," he muttered, tying off a makeshift bandage. "Not that I'm getting paid for any of this." The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, then at the bandages, and said something in her musical language. Ethan held up his hands. "Sorry, no idea what you're saying, but you're welcome, I guess." She frowned as if trying to puzzle out his words. Then, to his surprise, she mimicked his tone. "You're welcome?" Ethan blinked. "Well, that's new. Okay, let's try this. I'm Ethan." He pointed to himself. "Ethan." Her lips moved silently before she repeated, "Ethan." "Yeah, close enough." He pointed to her. "And you are?" She hesitated, then placed a hand on her chest. "Lyra." "Lyra," Ethan repeated. "Nice to meet you, I think." Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile, but it vanished quickly as her gaze darted to the window. She tensed, her body rigid with fear. Ethan followed her line of sight, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. just the dark forest and the strange lights still flickering in the sky. "Hey," he said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here. No one's getting in without me knowing." Lyra didn't seem convinced, but she relaxed slightly, her breathing slowing. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "All right, Ethan," he muttered to himself. "You've officially lost it. Alien woman on your couch, weird lights in the sky. Tomorrow you're calling the authorities. Let them deal with this." But even as he said it, he knew he wouldn't. Something about Lyra, her vulnerability, her otherworldly presence, made it impossible to walk away. And then there was the nagging question. If she was running from something, what would happen if it found her? Ethan sighed. "Guess I'm in this now," he said aloud, glancing at Lyra. She had drifted into an uneasy sleep, her expression troubled. Great, just great. As he turned off the light and settled into his own chair, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life had just been irrevocably upended. And somewhere deep in the forest, a faint, mechanical hum echoed through the trees, growing louder with each passing moment. Morning came reluctantly, the sun filtering through the dense canopy of trees that surrounded Ethan's cabin. The strange lights in the sky had vanished, leaving only a faint sense of unease in their wake. Ethan woke to the sound of soft, melodic humming. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, but then he remembered Lyra. He sat up in his chair, his back protesting after a night of less than ideal sleep. Lyra was sitting up on the couch, her silvery skin catching the morning light. She was examining one of the makeshift bandages he'd tied around her arm, her expression a mix of curiosity and confusion. "Good morning," Ethan said cautiously, his voice cutting through the quiet. Lyra looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "Ethan," she said, her voice tentative but clearer than the night before. "That's me," Ethan replied, running a hand through his hair. "How are you feeling?" Lyra tilted her head, clearly not understanding the question. Ethan gestured to her arm and side, mimicking a pained expression. "Better?" Understanding dawned in her starry eyes. She nodded, then pointed to him. "Better. Because, Ethan." "Well, I'm glad I could help," he said, feeling a flicker of pride. "Though I'm not exactly a doctor." Lyra's gaze shifted to the window, her expression darkening. She said something in her musical language, the melody tinged with worry. Ethan followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual. "Still spooked, huh?" he said. "Can't blame you. Last night was something." He stood and stretched. "All right, let's get some food in you. Do you eat? You eat, right?" Lyra gave him a puzzled look, and Ethan sighed. "Right, of course, you don't understand." He walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge, pulling out a loaf of bread and some eggs. "Let's keep it simple. Eggs and toast. If you don't like it, we'll figure something else out." As he cooked, Lyra watched him with wide-eyed fascination. When he cracked an egg into the pan, she gasped softly, her hands clasping together. Ethan chuckled. "Not much of a cook, huh? Don't worry, I'm not either." The smell of sizzling eggs filled the cabin, and Ethan set a plate in front of Lyra. She examined the food like it was a piece of alien technology, poking the toast cautiously. "It's not going to bite you," Ethan said, sitting across from her. Lyra hesitated, then took a tentative bite. Her eyes widened, and she made a sound somewhere between a hum and a sigh. "Good," she said, smiling. Ethan laughed. "Well, that's a first. No one's ever called my cooking good before." As they ate, Ethan tried to piece together more of Lyra's story. She spoke in fragments, her words a mix of her own language and the few English words she had picked up. He learned that she had been running from something or someone, and that the medallion she wore was important. She clutched it protectively whenever the conversation turned to her pursuers. "All right," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. "I get it. You're on the run, and that thing around your neck is a big deal, but I still don't know why you're here, or what you are." Lyra frowned, as if struggling to find the right words. Finally, She pointed to the sky. Home. Far. Far, Ethan repeated. Like another planet far? Lyra nodded, her expression somber. Ethan let out a low whistle. Okay, that's a lot to take in. He rubbed the back of his neck. So, what are we talking here? Little green men? Flying saucers? Or... He trailed off, realizing how ridiculous he sounded. Lyra's lips twitched in amusement, and she said something that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Well, glad to see you've got a sense of humor, Ethan said. That makes one of us. The rest of the day passed in a strange rhythm. Lyra explored the cabin, her curiosity leading to several amusing mishaps. She nearly broke the faucet in the kitchen, trying to figure out how it worked, and jumped back in alarm when water sprayed out. Ethan had to stifle a laugh as he showed her how to turn it on and off. See? It's not magic, he said, demonstrating. Lyra mimicked his movements, her expression one of delighted triumph when she got it right. Not magic, she repeated, grinning. Later, she discovered Ethan's bookshelf and spent hours flipping through his collection of novels, her eyes wide with wonder. She couldn't read the words, but the illustrations in some of the books seemed to fascinate her. Big fan of science fiction, huh? Ethan joked when he caught her poring over the cover of The War of the Worlds. Hope you don't take it personally. Lyra didn't understand the joke, but she smiled anyway. That night, as the forest grew quiet, Ethan found himself sitting by the fire, Lyra across from him. She was holding the medallion, her expression distant. You're worried they'll find you, aren't you? Ethan asked. Lyra looked up, her eyes shimmering with something like fear. Danger, she said softly. Ethan, danger. Ethan sighed. Yeah, I figured as much, but I'm not just going to hand you over to whoever's after you. That's not how I do things. Lyra's gaze softened and she reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. Ethan. Kind. Don't mention it, Ethan said, feeling a little awkward. But if we're going to keep you safe, we need a plan. Lyra nodded, her determination evident. As the fire crackled and the stars appeared in the sky, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life had taken a turn he'd never expected. And though he didn't know what lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let Lyra face it alone. The cabin was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the medallion Lyra had handed him. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, an intricate piece of craftsmanship that seemed almost alive. The surface was etched with swirling patterns that shimmered faintly, as though tiny currents of light moved beneath the surface. So this thing's important, Ethan muttered, turning it over in his hands. Mind telling me why? Lyra, seated across from him, tilted her head. She gestured to the medallion, then pointed to the sky. Home, she said simply. Home, Ethan repeated. Okay, so this is... What? A key? A map? A really fancy souvenir? Lyra frowned, clearly frustrated by the language barrier. She reached for the medallion, her fingers brushing against it. Instantly, the patterns flared to life, casting a soft golden light across the room. Ethan jerked back in surprise. All right, that's new, he said, his voice tinged with awe. The medallion projected a series of images into the air, stars, planets, and strange angular symbols that rotated slowly. Lyra pointed to one of the planets, her expression earnest. Home, she repeated, her voice filled with longing. Ethan stared at the projection, his mind racing. So this is a star map, he said, more to himself than to her. And that's where you're from. Lyra nodded, her eyes shining with hope. Well, that's great and all, Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck. But unless you've got a spaceship parked out back, I'm not sure how we're supposed to get you there. Lyra's hopeful expression faltered, and Ethan immediately regretted his words. Hey, he said gently. We'll figure it out. One step at a time, okay? The rest of the day was spent trying to decipher the medallion's secrets. Ethan set up his old laptop on the kitchen table, its screen flickering as he searched for anything that might help. Meanwhile, Lyra watched him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "You know," Ethan said, glancing at her, "I'm starting to think you're enjoying watching me struggle." Lyra tilted her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Ethan, struggle," she repeated, her tone teasing. "Great," Ethan muttered, typing furiously. "First contact with an alien, and she's a comedian." Despite his best efforts, the symbols on the medallion remained a mystery. Ethan leaned back in his chair with a groan. "I'm out of ideas," he admitted. "Unless you've got some kind of universal translator hidden in that thing, we're stuck." Lyra didn't seem discouraged. She reached for the medallion again, her fingers brushing the surface. This time, the projection changed. The star map disappeared, replaced by a series of rapid pulses of light. Ethan frowned. "What's it doing now?" Lyra's expression grew serious. "Signal," she said. "Signal?" Ethan repeated, sitting up straighter. "You mean it's sending something?" Lyra nodded, her gaze fixed on the medallion. Ethan's stomach sank. "Okay, hold on. If this thing's broadcasting, who's picking it up? Your people or the ones chasing you?" Lyra didn't answer. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the medallion, her fear palpable. "All right," Ethan said, standing. "We need to shut it off. Now." He reached for the medallion, but Lyra pulled it back, shaking her head. "No," she said firmly. "Lyra, if they're tracking you—" "Signal. Help," she interrupted, her voice steady. Ethan paused, his mind racing. "You think someone friendly might hear it?" Lyra nodded, her expression resolute. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, but if this brings trouble to my doorstep, you're explaining it to the neighbors." Lyra didn't understand the joke, but she smiled faintly, her gratitude clear. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring out at the dark forest. The medallion's faint glow cast dancing shadows on the walls, a constant reminder of the risk they were taking. He glanced at Lyra, who was curled up on the couch, her breathing steady. She looked so peaceful, so human, despite the otherworldly shimmer of her skin. Ethan couldn't help but wonder about her life before all this. What kind of world had she come from? What had she left behind? A sudden noise snapped him out of his thoughts, a faint, mechanical hum, barely audible over the rustling leaves. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. "Lyra," he whispered, moving to her side. "Wake up." She stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "Ethan?" "Shh," he said, holding a finger to his lips. "Listen." The hum grew louder, accompanied by a series of faint rhythmic clicks. Lyra sat up, her expression tense. She clutched the medallion to her chest, her fear evident. "Is that them?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra didn't answer, but the look in her eyes was enough. Ethan grabbed the flashlight and a sturdy walking stick he kept by the door. "Stay here," he said, his tone firm. "No," Lyra said, standing. "Danger." "Exactly," Ethan replied, "which is why you're staying put." Lyra hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Ethan stepped outside, the cool night air biting at his skin. The forest was alive with sound, the mechanical hum mingling with the chirping of crickets. He scanned the darkness, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. "All right," he muttered to himself. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The hum grew louder, and Ethan's pulse quickened. He tightened his grip on the walking stick, every nerve in his body on high alert. And then he saw it, a faint flickering light moving through the trees, too steady to be fireflies and too erratic to be a flashlight. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the light drew closer, revealing a sleek metallic shape hovering just above the ground. "Okay," he whispered, his voice trembling. "This is officially above my pay grade." The object paused, its lights dimming slightly. Ethan took a cautious step back, his mind racing. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't here by accident. Before he could decide what to do, a voice crackled to life, speaking in the same musical tones as Lyra's language. Ethan froze, the words incomprehensible but clearly directed at him. "Great," he muttered. "Now I'm talking to UFOs. What's next? A laser battle?" The object emitted a soft, pulsing light, as if waiting for a response. Ethan raised his hands slowly, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the trees. Hi?" he said, his voice shaky. The light pulsed again, brighter this time. Ethan's mind raced. Was it a threat? A greeting? A warning? Behind him, the cabin door creaked open, and Lyra stepped out, the medallion glowing brightly in her hands. "Lyra!" Ethan hissed. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. Instead, she held the medallion high, its light merging with the object's glow. The forest was bathed in a dazzling display of colors, and the hum grew louder, resonating deep in Ethan's chest. As the light enveloped them, Ethan realized one thing. Whatever was happening, there was no turning back. The forest erupted in a kaleidoscope of light, casting the trees in surreal hues of gold and blue. Ethan squinted against the brilliance, his heart hammering in his chest. Lyra stood at the center of it all, her medallion glowing brighter than ever. She seemed unafraid, her face calm, yet resolute. The metallic object hovering in the clearing pulsed with light, its rhythmic hum now a low, resonant melody. Ethan couldn't tell if it was a machine, a life form, or something in between. All he knew was that it had responded to Lyra's medallion, and whatever it wasn't leaving anytime soon. Lyra?" Ethan called, taking a cautious step toward her. "Is this part of the plan, or should I start running?" Lyra glanced back at him, her lips twitching into a faint smile. "No run," she said simply. "Well, that's reassuring," Ethan muttered, gripping his walking stick like it was a sword. "I'll just stand here and hope it's not hungry." The object emitted a series of soft musical tones, almost like a question. Lyra responded in her own melodic language, her voice calm and steady. Ethan could only watch as the exchange unfolded, feeling like a spectator at a very strange play. Finally, the object's lights dimmed slightly, and a section of its smooth metallic surface began to shift. Ethan's breath caught as a small hatch opened, revealing a figure inside. It was humanoid, but unmistakably alien, its tall, slender frame covered in shimmering, iridescent skin. Its eyes were large and luminescent, reflecting the light like twin moons. The creature stepped forward with a grace that made Ethan feel like a clumsy oaf in comparison. "Okay," Ethan said under his breath. "This is officially the weirdest day of my life." The alien stopped a few feet from Lyra, its gaze shifting between her and the medallion. It spoke in the same melodic tones as Lyra, its voice deeper but no less musical. Lyra responded quickly, her tone urgent yet respectful. She gestured toward Ethan, who froze as the alien's glowing eyes fixed on him. Hi," Ethan said, giving an awkward wave. "I'm Ethan. Nice to meet you, I guess." The alien tilted its head as if considering him. Then it reached out a hand, palm up, and spoke again. Ethan looked to Lyra for guidance. "What's it saying? Please tell me it's not asking for a blood sample." Lyra smiled faintly. "Friend," she said, gesturing for Ethan to step closer. "Friend, huh?" Ethan muttered. "Let's hope it feels the same way." He took a hesitant step forward, then another, until he was standing beside Lyra. The alien extended its hand further, waiting. Ethan hesitated, then placed his hand in its palm. The alien's skin was cool and smooth, almost metallic, yet it pulsed faintly with life. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a rush of warmth spread through Ethan's arm, followed by a flood of images and sensations. He saw stars, vast and endless, swirling in patterns he couldn't comprehend. He felt the weight of lifetimes, the echo of voices speaking in harmony. And then he saw Lyra, her world, her people, her flight from danger. It was overwhelming, yet somehow comforting, like being wrapped in a blanket of understanding. When the connection broke, Ethan stumbled back, his mind reeling. "Okay," he said, breathing heavily. "That was intense." The alien regarded him with what Ethan could only describe as approval. It spoke again, this time addressing both him and Lyra. "She says thank you," Lyra translated, her voice soft. "Thank me?" Ethan said, blinking. "For what? I didn't do anything." "You help," Lyra said simply, her gaze warm. Ethan scratched the back of his neck, feeling a little sheepish. "Well, I couldn't just leave you out there, could I?" As the night deepened, the alien, who Lyra called Solon, explained their purpose through a mix of gestures, tones, and Lyra's translations. Solon was a scout, sent to locate Lyra after her distress signal had been detected. They were part of a group loyal to her, one that had risked much to protect her from those who sought to harm her. Ethan listened intently, though he couldn't help but crack a few jokes to lighten the mood. "So, let me get this straight," he said, pointing to the medallion. "This thing's like an intergalactic GPS, and you're basically royalty on the run. Did I miss anything?" Lyra tilted her head, considering his words. "Yes," she said, her tone serious. "Miss... much." Ethan groaned. "Great. Remind me never to play charades with you." Despite the humor, the gravity of the situation wasn't lost on him. Solon explained that Lyra's enemies were close, their ships combing the region for any sign of her. The forest, dense and remote, had bought them time, but it wouldn't last forever. "So, what's the plan?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. "Do we hide, fight, build a spaceship out of spare parts?" Lyra and Solon exchanged a look, then turned to Ethan. Lyra spoke carefully, her words deliberate. "Need place safe, far." Ethan frowned. "Safe and far? That's a tall order. We're not exactly swimming in options here." Solon gestured toward the medallion, its light dimming as the projection reappeared. The star map shifted, zooming in on a small, unassuming planet. "That's where we're going?" Ethan asked, studying the image. Lyra nodded. "Safe, hidden." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, let's say we get there. How exactly are we supposed to travel across the galaxy? I don't think my truck's up for the job." Solon's eyes glimmered, and the alien stepped aside, revealing the hovering craft in the clearing. Ethan stared, his jaw dropping. "You've got to be kidding me. That thing can fly?" Lyra smiled. "Yes, fly." Ethan threw up his hands. "Of course it can. Why not? Let's just hope it's got room for my toolkit." As the preparations began, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his life had taken a turn he'd never expected. The forest, once his quiet refuge, was now the staging ground for something far greater. And though he didn't know what lay ahead, he couldn't deny the spark of excitement and dread burning in his chest. "All right," he said, glancing at Lyra and Solon. "Let's get moving before your friends with the bad intentions show up. But if we're doing this, I'm calling shotgun." Lyra tilted her head, puzzled. "Gun?" Ethan grinned. "I'll explain later. Let's just hope your spaceship's got seatbelts." The alien craft hummed softly, its sleek surface glinting under the pale moonlight. Ethan stood a few feet away, staring at it with a mix of awe and apprehension. "So," he said, turning to Lyra and Solon, "this thing's going to get us to your safe haven, right? No offense, but it looks like it's made out of a futuristic toaster." Lyra gave him a puzzled look, while Solon tilted their head, their luminous eyes narrowing slightly. Ethan raised his hands defensively. "Kidding. Just a joke. I'm sure it's a very reliable toaster." Lyra shook her head with a faint smile, clearly catching on to Ethan's humor. She stepped forward and placed her hand on the craft's surface. The ship responded instantly, its lights flaring to life as a ramp extended smoothly to the ground. "All right," Ethan muttered, gripping the strap of his duffel bag. "Guess we're doing this." As they stepped inside, Ethan couldn't help but gape at the interior. The ship was far more spacious than it appeared from the outside, its walls lined with sleek, glowing panels. Strange, vine-like structures coiled along the ceiling, pulsing faintly with light. The air was cool and carried a faint metallic tang. "This is something else," Ethan admitted, running a hand over one of the panels. "Home," Lyra said softly, her voice tinged with nostalgia. Ethan glanced at her, noting the way her expression softened as she took in the surroundings. It was clear this ship wasn't just a means of escape, it was a piece of her world, a connection to the life she'd left behind. "Well," he said, clapping his hands, "let's hope it's got a coffee maker because it's going to be a long trip." Solon took the helm, their long, slender fingers gliding over the controls with practiced ease. The ship hummed louder as it lifted off the ground, the forest falling away beneath them. Ethan watched through a small viewport, his stomach doing flips as the craft ascended. "I'm not great with heights," he admitted, gripping the edge of his seat. "Just so you know." Lyra, seated beside him, gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Safe," she said simply. "Easy for you to say," Ethan muttered. "You're not the one who gets queasy on roller coasters." As the ship broke through the atmosphere, the view outside shifted. The inky blackness of space stretched out before them, dotted with countless stars. Ethan couldn't help but stare, his earlier unease forgotten. "Wow," he breathed. "It's beautiful." Lyra nodded, her gaze distant. "Stars. Guide us." "Let's hope they guide us somewhere with decent food," Ethan said, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm not sure I'm ready for intergalactic rations." Lyra chuckled softly, the sound like a melody. The peace didn't last long. Solon's tone shifted abruptly, their voice low and urgent as they spoke to Lyra. The ship's lights dimmed, and a series of sharp beeps echoed through the cabin. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, sitting up straighter. "Follow," Lyra said, her expression tense. "Follow? You mean someone's following us?" Ethan's stomach sank. "Please tell me it's not the bad guys." Lyra's silence was answer enough. Ethan groaned, rubbing his temples. "Great. Just great. Can't we go one day without being chased by interstellar bounty hunters or whatever they are?" Solon barked a command, and the ship surged forward, the hum of its engines rising to a near roar. Ethan gripped his seat as the craft darted through the void, stars streaking past in a blur. "I'm guessing this thing doesn't have seat belts," he muttered, clinging for dear life. Lyra glanced at him, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and worry. "Hold," she said simply. "Yeah, no kidding," Ethan replied, his knuckles white. The pursuing ships soon came into view, sleek and menacing with their angular designs and glowing red lights. Ethan's heart pounded as they closed the distance, their weapons glowing ominously. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, his voice high-pitched with panic. "Please tell me we've got lasers or shields or something." Lyra pointed to Solon, who was already working furiously at the controls. The ship veered sharply, weaving through an asteroid field that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. "An asteroid field," Ethan yelped. "Are you kidding me? This is straight out of a movie." Lyra frowned, clearly not understanding the reference. The ship dodged and weaved, narrowly avoiding the massive chunks of rock that hurtled past. Ethan couldn't decide what was worse, the relentless pursuit or the constant near misses. "Next time," he said through gritted teeth, "remind me to stay on Earth." Solon barked another command, and the ship's interior lights flickered. Ethan felt a strange sensation, like static electricity coursing through the air. "What now?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Jump," Lyra said, her tone steady. "Jump? What do you mean, jump?" Lyra pointed to the glowing panels, which now pulsed in a rhythmic pattern. "Safe. Far." Ethan's eyes widened as realization dawned. "You're talking about a hyperspace jump, aren't you?" Lyra nodded. Ethan swallowed hard. "Okay, sure, why not? Let's just hope this thing doesn't leave my stomach behind." The ship shuddered, and the view outside shifted again. The stars seemed to stretch and blur, then vanish altogether as the craft entered a tunnel of swirling light. Ethan gripped his seat, his breath coming in short gasps. "This is insane," he muttered. "Absolutely insane." Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "Safe," she said again, her voice soothing. Ethan managed a weak smile. "I'll hold you to that." When the ship finally emerged from hyperspace, the tension in the cabin eased. The pursuing ships were nowhere to be seen, and the view outside was calm and serene. Ethan let out a shaky laugh, slumping back in his seat. "Well, that was something. Do we get frequent flyer miles for this?" Lyra tilted her head, clearly confused. "Never mind," Ethan said, waving a hand. "Let's just focus on staying alive, okay?" As the ship continued toward its destination, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at how much his life had changed. He was no longer just a guy living a quiet life in the woods. He was part of something far bigger, something he barely understood. And despite the danger, he couldn't deny the thrill of it all. The ship descended through a blanket of swirling mist, its engines humming softly as it neared the surface of an uncharted planet. Ethan pressed his face against the viewport, squinting at the landscape below. The planet's surface shimmered with hues of green and gold, its terrain dotted with crystalline structures that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "This is it?" he asked, glancing at Lyra. "Your safe haven?" Lyra nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "Home, for now." Ethan frowned. "It's beautiful, I'll give you that. But are we sure it's safe? I mean, it doesn't exactly scream Fortress of Solitude." Solon, seated at the controls, made a low, melodic sound that Lyra translated. "Hidden. Hard. To find." "Well, let's hope your enemies didn't bring a GPS," Ethan muttered, gripping the edge of his seat as the ship touched down with a gentle thud. The air outside was warm and filled with a faint, sweet fragrance that reminded Ethan of wildflowers. The ground beneath his boots was soft and springy, covered in a thick, moss-like substance that glowed faintly with each step. "This place is like a fairy tale," Ethan said, looking around in awe, "except, with aliens." Lyra led the way, her medallion glowing faintly as she navigated the terrain with ease. Solon followed closely, their tall frame blending seamlessly with the strange organic surroundings. Ethan brought up the rear, his eyes darting to every shadow and movement. "So what's the plan?" he asked, trying to keep up. "Do we build a treehouse, start a farm, maybe set up a nice little alien Airbnb?" Lyra glanced back at him, her lips twitching into a faint smile. "Plan, hide, wait." "Hide and wait, huh?" Ethan said, stepping over a glowing root. "Great. I'm not exactly good at sitting still, but I'll try." As they ventured deeper into the forest, the crystalline structures grew larger and more intricate, their surfaces reflecting the light in dazzling patterns. Lyra stopped in front of one particularly massive formation, its spires reaching high into the sky. "Here," she said, placing her hand on the structure's surface. Ethan watched in amazement as the crystal responded to her touch, its surface rippling like water. A doorway materialized, revealing a warm, inviting glow from within. "Okay," Ethan said, stepping closer. "That's impressive. Does it come with a welcome mat?" Lyra gestured for him to follow, and they stepped inside. The interior was even more stunning than the exterior, with walls that seemed to pulse with life. Strange, vine-like structures coiled along the ceiling, their glowing tendrils casting soft, shifting patterns of light. "It's like a living organism," Ethan said, running a hand along the wall. "This is incredible." "Safe," Lyra said, her voice tinged with relief. "Well, that's good to know," Ethan replied, "because I'm pretty sure my heart can't take another hyperspace jump right now." The group settled into the crystalline structure, which seemed to adapt to their needs. Sections of the walls shifted and reshaped themselves, forming seating areas, sleeping quarters, and even a small table. Ethan marveled at the technology, or was it biology, that made it all possible. "Do you ever get used to this?" he asked Lyra, gesturing to the walls. Lyra tilted her head. "Used, yes, but always wonder." Ethan chuckled. "Well, at least I'm not the only one who's impressed." As the day turned to evening, the group gathered around the table, sharing a meal of rations provided by the ship. Ethan tried not to grimace as he bit into a chewy, flavorless bar. "Do you guys eat this stuff all the time?" he asked, holding up the bar. Lyra smiled faintly. "Not choice." "Well, I guess I can't complain," Ethan said, taking another bite. "It beats starving. Barely." The peace was short-lived. Solon suddenly stiffened, their glowing eyes narrowing as they tilted their head, listening. A low, ominous hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing moment. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his stomach sinking. "Ships," Lyra said, her voice tight. Ethan's heart raced. "They found us? Already? How?" Lyra shook her head, her expression grim. "Not know, but come." Solon barked a command, and the crystalline structure responded instantly, its walls shifting and sealing off the entrances. The soft, warm light dimmed, replaced by a faint, pulsing glow. "Okay," Ethan said, pacing. "We need a plan. Do we fight? Run? Hide under the table and hope they go away?" "Hide," Lyra said, her tone firm. "Hide where?" Ethan gestured around the room. "This place isn't exactly inconspicuous." Lyra pointed to the medallion, which now glowed brighter than ever. "Trust, crystal." "Trust the crystal?" Ethan repeated, his voice rising. "Sure, why not? It's not like we have a lot of options." The crystalline structure began to hum softly, its glow intensifying. Ethan felt a strange sensation, like static electricity prickling his skin. The walls seemed to shimmer and blur, and suddenly, the entire room felt different. "What just happened?" he asked, looking around. "Hide," Lyra said simply. Ethan moved to the window, his heart pounding. Outside, the landscape had changed. The glowing moss and crystalline spires were gone, replaced by a barren, rocky terrain. "They won't find us here," Lyra explained. "Crystal, move!" Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. "Wait, you're telling me this whole place can just teleport?" Lyra nodded. Ethan let out a shaky laugh. "Okay, that's officially the coolest and weirdest thing I've ever seen." As the hum of the enemy ships faded into the distance, the tension in the room eased. Ethan slumped into a chair, letting out a long breath. "Well," he said, "I guess we're safe. For now." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression warm. "Safe. Because you." Ethan chuckled. "Hey, don't give me too much credit. I'm just the guy who stumbled into all this." Lyra smiled. "Still, help." Ethan nodded, his chest swelling with a strange mix of pride and determination. "All right, let's figure out our next move, because something tells me this isn't over yet." And deep down, he knew he was right. The crystalline sanctuary hummed softly as Ethan leaned against the smooth, glowing wall, his thoughts swirling. The events of the past weeks had been nothing short of extraordinary. He had gone from a reclusive forest dweller to an accidental participant in an intergalactic conflict. Now, as the dust began to settle, he realized he wasn't the same man who had stumbled upon an injured alien queen in the woods. Lyra stood nearby, her medallion shimmering faintly as she gazed at a holographic map projected from the crystalline structure. Solon worked beside her, their movements precise and deliberate. Despite their alien appearance, Ethan had come to see them as comrades, friends even. "All right," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "What's the plan? Please tell me it doesn't involve more hyperspace jumps or asteroid fields. My stomach's still recovering from the last one." Lyra turned to him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Plan Rebuild. Rebuild? Ethan raised an eyebrow. You mean like a new kingdom? Here? Lyra nodded. Safe. For now. Grow. Strong. Ethan scratched the back of his head. Well, I guess that's as good a plan as any. But you're going to need more than just the three of us, unless Solon's secretly an expert in urban planning. Solon let out a low, melodic sound that Ethan chose to interpret as a chuckle. Over the next few days, the trio worked tirelessly to establish a foundation for their new home. The crystalline structure responded to their needs, expanding and reshaping itself to create living spaces, storage areas, and even a small garden that glowed with bioluminescent plants. Ethan found himself surprisingly adept at the tasks assigned to him. Whether it was repairing damaged equipment from the ship or helping Lyra decipher ancient texts stored in the crystal's memory banks, he tackled each challenge with determination and a healthy dose of humor. Let me get this straight, he said one evening, holding up a strange, glowing tool. This thing is supposed to be a wrench because it looks more like a futuristic backscratcher. Lyra chuckled softly, her laughter like a melody. Tool, versatile. Versatile, huh? Ethan examined the tool, then used it to scratch an itch on his back. You're not wrong. As the days turned into weeks, the planet began to feel like home. The oppressive weight of constant danger had lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose and camaraderie. Ethan found himself growing closer to Lyra. Her quiet strength and unwavering determination inspired him, and he admired the way she carried the weight of her responsibilities with grace. One evening, as they sat beneath the glowing vines of their crystalline shelter, Ethan turned to her. You know, he said, when I first found you in the forest, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. If someone had told me I'd end up here, on an alien planet, helping a queen rebuild her kingdom, I'd have called them crazy. Lyra tilted her head, her luminous eyes studying him. Regret? Ethan shook his head. Not for a second. Sure, it's been terrifying, and I've probably aged 10 years in the past month, but it's also been amazing. I've learned so much, seen things I never thought possible, and I've met you. Lyra's expression softened, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, the glow of the vines casting gentle shadows around them. And the peace didn't last long. A faint tremor shook the ground, followed by a low, distant rumble. Solon appeared in the doorway, their expression tense. What now? Ethan groaned, rising to his feet. Earthquake, alien stampede, space pirates? Lyra's medallion flared brightly, and she stood, her posture alert. Signal, she said. Others. Come. Ethan's eyes widened. Others? You mean more of your people? Lyra nodded. Survivors. Well, that's good news, right? Ethan said, glancing between her and Solon. Unless they're not friendly. Please tell me they're friendly. Lyra's expression remained calm. We see. The survivors arrived in a small fleet of battered ships, their designs varied and worn from years of hardship. Ethan watched from a distance as they disembarked, their expressions a mix of relief and apprehension. Lyra stepped forward, her medallion glowing brightly as she addressed them in her native tongue. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. She was welcoming them, offering them hope and a new beginning. As the survivors began to settle into their new home, Ethan found himself surrounded by curious onlookers. Many of them were fascinated by him, the lone human among their ranks. Great, he muttered to Lyra. I'm the resident oddity. Should I start charging admission? Lyra chuckled. Ethan, unique. Yeah, well, you're not so ordinary yourself, he replied with a grin. In the weeks that followed, the new community began to take shape. Structures rose from the ground, crafted from the planet's abundant crystalline resources. The survivors brought their skills and knowledge, working together to create a thriving settlement. Ethan found his place among them, using his ingenuity and earthborn perspective to solve problems and bridge gaps between cultures. He even managed to teach a few of the aliens how to play chess, though he quickly learned that their advanced intellects made them formidable opponents. "All right," he said after losing his third game in a row. "Maybe next time we try checkers." As the settlement flourished, Lyra approached Ethan one evening, her expression thoughtful. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft. "Thank you." "For what?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "For everything," she replied. "Without you, none of this." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, feeling a little awkward. "Hey, I just stumbled into this mess. You're the one who made it all happen." Lyra smiled. "Together." Ethan nodded, a sense of warmth spreading through him. "Yeah, together." As the twin moons rose high in the sky, casting their silvery light over the settlement, Ethan stood at the edge of the forest, gazing out at the horizon. He had come a long way from the quiet life he'd once known. He had faced dangers he never could have imagined, forged bonds that transcended worlds, and discovered a strength within himself he hadn't known existed. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wasn't facing them alone. Together, they would build a future worth fighting for, a future filled with hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship. And as he turned to rejoin his new family, he couldn't help but smile. This was only the beginning.